Okay, hello chess players. In this video I'm going to talk about how to employ good technique in endgames. I'm using this position as an example, but I could use any number of positions as an example of how to employ good technique. But I also want to try to touch on why good technique is so important, why we do need to try to have good technique and make sure that we don't allow our opponent to get back into the game. And we want to make our wins as easy as possible and as smooth as possible when we have a big advantage. So anyways, if you like content like this and you want to see more of it, please hit that subscribe button and click on the notification icon. So here, white has a big advantage. White has two connected passed pawns on the outside of the board. They're not that far away from queening, and really it should be no problem for white to win the game from here. So the question is, what is the best technique? And of course, why is it so important to have the best technique here? And the reason I ask that question is because, let's just say that we think, well, the best technique is to make a queen as quickly as possible. Some people say that. Some people say that about checkmate, too. They say, well, the fastest checkmate is always the best checkmate. It's better to play a mate in 2 than a mate in 3, even if the mate in 3 is mind-bogglingly simpler to calculate than the mate in 2. But let's say that white takes that approach, and white says, you know what? Well, let me just try to make a queen. You can actually play the move b6 here. And you can try to make a queen. You can play b6 because there's a tactical justification here. If b6, if they play rook b6, you can simply play b7 next. And when you play b7, there's no stopping you from making a queen. Like, you can't play rook a2 check and bring the rook behind. You can't play rook a8 to stop you from making a queen. So here, you're making your queen as quickly as possible. Now, of course, the downside here is in the process of making this queen, you're sacrificing this rook. And now you make your queen, and now the rook heads over to f6, and black has created this sort of blockade of this position, which is going to make it very difficult for white to make forward progress. Now, depending on how much you know about endgames, you may or may not know if this endgame is a win, or if this endgame is a draw. So already we're kind of like in a fuzzy gray area here. Like, if we eliminate the h-pawns, for example, like if we take black's h-pawn away, and we eliminate white's f-pawn, this position is a known book draw. There's no way to win. There's no way to break through the blockade. The rook just shuffles back and forth between h6 and f6, and we can't make progress. If we eliminate the black h-pawn and we move the f-pawn to the h-file, this is also a known book draw. So both of those scenarios are book draws. So what's this position? And it would be important to know, like, if you're going to go into this endgame and you're going to say, I'm going to go into this endgame because I think this is winning, should this position be a win or should it be a draw? This position should be a win for white. But it's actually a very difficult win. And the win is going to involve white eventually sacrificing his queen for that black rook. There's no other way to win it. And it's only a win because we have an f-pawn. If it was like a different pawn, like I said, if it's an h-pawn, we can't win. So we're going to have something like queen c8, king g6. We're going to get that queen behind the pawns. We're going to try to make it awkward for black to continually anchor his rook and anchor his king. We're going to have rook f5. We're going to make slow progress with our king, trying to move our king up the board. Eventually make some progress with our pawn. So we're going to try to get to something like this. We're going to slowly work our way up into this blockade, and we're going to get to a position like this. This makes it awkward for black to anchor his rook, like rook f5 is awkward. Also, a move like rook c6 is awkward because we would have queen e8 check. So these moves are becoming increasingly awkward for black, and this makes it difficult for black to find a move that works. So one option that black could try to come up with is he could play h5 to try to create a second anchor point for his rook. Now he can anchor the rook on h6 as well as f6. So just as a for instance, white could do some sort of breakthrough with a move like queen e8, and now we're going to have king h7 just for illustrative purposes. King h6 is also possible, holding on to that pawn. White's idea would be the same in either case. White's idea is to eventually sacrifice for the rook on f6. So the main idea is to play something like queen h5, king g8, queen e8 check, king here, and then we bring our king up. And the way that we're going to win this game is we're going to create a passed f-pawn, and eventually we're going to win. So we would do something like queen e7, and then eventually we would have to sacrifice for this rook. And then when we sacrifice, we need to push this f-pawn, and we need to get in front of it, and we need to make a queen. So at least theoretically, this endgame should be winnable. But as you can probably already figure out by looking at it, a lot can go wrong. Like, what if after h5 black hangs on to this pawn? How do we make progress? How do we make progress in those situations? Well, it's going to be the same. We're going to try to play like king e5, queen e7, and then sacrifice on f6. But depending on how far up the board the h-pawn is when we do it, we may or may not be winning that race with the f-pawn. So we need to kind of time out when we sacrifice for the rook, and of course if they push the h-pawn further, then we need to go back and try to grab that h-pawn. So it's not a simple win. It's definitely, it should be a win. White should be winning. Like, you can play b6 and you can go into this blockading structure. If you're very, very familiar with it, you should be winning. But there's tons of situations where you may not be winning. After they make the blockading maneuver, like after rook a6, b7, rook takes c6, b8 equals queen, rook f6, what happens if you play f4 and they play g5 and then we make some sort of exchange and then they move their blockade to the f4 square? Is that position a win? Is that position a draw? With the pawn advanced? If we trade off our f-pawn, can we win anymore? That's the question. Of course, without the f-pawn on the board, winning is very difficult. So, you really need your f-pawn to try to win this position. If the f-pawn disappears, the blockading structures are a lot of times going to be a draw. So, coming back to this position, that's why good technique is really important. What is the best technique here? How does white win without risking a draw, basically? How does white win without risking the possibility of a draw? Without black being able to fight back and get a draw? Well, the answer is really simple. We advance our pawns without losing a rook. So there's a couple of different ways we can do that. If the king comes over to d7, we can shuffle the rook away. Another very simple strategy is we can simply put the rook on b6, put the rook on b7, and then slowly advance the pawns. We can play a7 followed by b6, followed by rook b8, followed by a8 equals queen. We can make the queen without ever having to sacrifice our rook, and eventually black will have to sacrifice his rook for the queen, and then we're just going to be up a whole rook. It's much better to be up a whole rook than be up a queen for a rook. So simple technique in this exact position would be something simple. We could just play check. Rook c7 check, king g6, a7. Push the pawn. Simple. h5, and now we would have more than one way to win. We could simply play pawn to b6, followed by rook up, and then the pawn goes to a8, and that's making a queen without ever having to sacrifice our rook. Another solution could just be something like rook c6 and then rook a6. And then we're going to queen next move. If they exchange rooks, again, we're going to queen next move. It's going to be much, much better to just be up a whole queen than be up a queen for a rook. Being up a whole queen is better than being up a queen for a rook. That's essentially the essence of good technique, is to reduce your opponent's chances of fighting back in this situation. A little side note is I saw a game recently that had this type of position, but there was an additional pawn on d4. And that actually made the technique a little bit easier. He had the option of playing d4, d5, anchoring the rook, and then playing b6, b7. So that was an additional option to win this position. And of course, if you had a d-pawn and that was an option, that'd probably be the way to go. That's the simplest, and it's the way that the least can go wrong. And that's all good technique is, finding the simplest solution, the most precise solution to the position to make sure that nothing can go wrong, and you're not going to end up in a situation where you get a draw where really you should have won the game. Anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you liked this content. I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.